What is going on, guys? This is Michael Williams from Cartoon Universe, and today I wanted to kind of talk about time travel. Sweet, sweet time travel. Now, we all know that time travel can get pretty messy when it's not done correctly, and even when it is done correctly, it can get pretty confusing. Now, we do know Steven Universe did implement time travel sort of in the episode Steven and the Stevens in Season 1, and I doubt this plot point is ever going to come back, but it is possible, and regardless, it's something that's kind of fun to talk about. So I kind of wanted to explain how that timeline altering thing actually worked and how many timelines he actually ended up creating. I want to give a shout out to Steven U Theories on Tumblr, as well as Marauders Forever. Marauders Forever. Yeah, let's go with that. So just how many timelines did Steven create? Well, according to Steven U Theories on Tumblr, he apparently created 9 independent timelines. I'm going to read the post they posted about a year ago. So apparently 4 perish at this sea shrine, all having used the hourglass. Each of the timelines belonging to these Stevens is now Stevenless, as none of them have returned to their original timeline. So yeah, there's some dead Stevens, kids show. Original Steven, Steven Classic, dies at the shrine after destroying the hourglass. Band member Steven all die at the shrine. All Stevens seen in the quote-unquote Steven Civil War, except for the one in the hoodie, can be considered offshoots of these timelines. 2 are left in timelines where they have the hourglass, but have not used it. These Stevens have no idea about the conflict that caused the Steven Civil War, and are unlikely to have gone back to the sea shrine. They may in fact just take the hourglass back to Pearl, preventing any further time traveling. Car Wash Steven. When the original Steven goes back the second time, I wish I could go back and stop myself from stopping my dad, he only takes the previous time traveler, band member 2, not the Steven from that timeline. Scooter Steven. When original Steven goes back to stop the band forming, don't start the band Steven, it will only tear us apart, he is attacked by the band members and escapes. This timeline Steven is left alone and confused. 3 are left in timelines where the hourglass is destroyed before they can touch it. It is not out of the question that any of these Stevens is the quote-unquote real one, i.e. the one in the series currently follows, but we have seen no reference to the events of this episode since. Gemglow Steven. This Steven only briefly witnesses original Steven and the band members poof in and then out before barfing on the beach on Cookie Cat's grave. Rose's Room Steven. This Steven never sees his time-traveling doubles, as he parachutes from the quadruple bunk bed slide in the background. This Steven would have no knowledge of the hourglass or the horrors surrounding it. Sea Shrine Steven, aka New Steven. This is most likely the Steven the series is currently following. He is wearing a hoodie in the Steven Civil War and is the last Steven left standing. He goes on to play an awesome set with the Crystal Gems at Beachapalooza. This leaves us with some unsettling developments. If destroying the hourglass erased all timelines it had traveled to, then original Steven and Sea Shrine Steven, alongside every other Steven, collapsed into a single Steven in the Sea Shrine timeline. Steven is more than likely traumatized. All other timelines either do not exist or had their Stevens returned. If it only destroys timelines it had influence, then we still have 3 timelines. If it only destroyed timelines in which it was used, we have 5 timelines. But if it didn't destroy the original timeline, episodes 1 to 22, is now Stevenless. The Gems and Greg and everyone else are left with nothing but a scooter and a helmet. We are left with endless tears. The Gemglow timeline, episodes 1 to current, the Rose's Room timeline, episodes 19 to current, and the Sea Shrine timeline, episodes 22 to current, are now completely separate from the original and all completely plausible as a main timeline. So that's one theory that someone posted on Tumblr. Again, time travel gets very tricky, but Marauders Forever actually had a more analysis. So I'm going to read this post right now. So their thought is that the original Steven universe is dead, and we're watching everything that happens in an alternate timeline. So the episode Steven and the Stevens is admittedly not one of my favorite episodes. I think they made Steven and Steven and Steven and Steven and Steven way too annoying and out of character. But it also brings up one of the most fascinating plot points in the entire show that nobody in the fandom seems to want to talk about. The episode starts off with Steven getting the hourglass and going back in time. There, he styles his hair, so he gets like a pompadour type thing, which is really important. This way we know that he is Steven, our Steven. So chaos ensues and eventually goes back to stop his past self from getting the hourglass, which causes him to go mad with power. He then realizes that none of this is right, and he realizes that there's only one way to fix it: destroying the hourglass. And then he dies. Yes, he dies. The original Steven universe dies. The Steven we've watched for 22 episodes at that point dies, scarring his past self, who now lives in an alternate timeline where he never used the hourglass to go back in time. Granted, we're still watching Steven, but he's slightly different than the original Steven that we've watched for 22 episodes. That Steven completely sacrifices himself and dies a horrific death on screen, and nobody seems to want to talk about it. And now everything that has happened since that episode and everything that will happen is on an alternate timeline. This is actually even quoted by Steven in the ending song, Steven and the Crystal Gems, where he says, "I accidentally created an alternate timeline," even though we know that he technically created more, which may have been destroyed or may not have been, or some of them may not have been destroyed. They're just Steven lists. We have absolutely no idea. But someone else posted, Heavy Fish Cannon had a rebuttal to this post. Apparently they're a Homestuck fan. I've never read Homestuck. It sounds very confusing, and I don't think I'll ever get into Homestuck, but apparently they're a Homestuck fan, and this is similar to something that had happened in Homestuck. And basically they said Pompadour Steven needed to go back in time to change the timeline to prevent the bad future he came from, revealing that the story up to that point had actually been following a doomed timeline instead of the alpha timeline. So the alpha timeline is the Steven that was in the hoodie that witnessed all of the Stevens dying, and this the Steven that we're currently following, where everything else before that event is actually exactly the same, other than the fact that he doesn't get the hourglass. So essentially, the Pompadour Steven came from a doomed timeline, which means it was never the true timeline to begin with. So the Steven that we're currently watching, who witnessed all the Stevens die, is actually the main timeline, who came from the is the Steven
that we knew of from the past, who
you know what, screw it.